a bad job of letting you guys know that we were doing it, how we did it, that 2 people lost their jobs, all of those things. And we'll just start with an apology for doing such a bad job about it. An apology that we're taking away a show that so many of you love.
So we want to give that another shot to talk through, and we also want to respond to some of your comments. As creators and as a company, we've always prided ourselves on transparency and authenticity. It's clear this is a moment where we didn't rise up to that stance in the show and keep it going with other TriCasts. Part of what we talked about was like, oh, we're so busy, which is not why we ended the show, and we'll talk about that again in a second.
It is true.
We're busy.
Very busy.
Yeah.
But the financial thing we talked about earlier is one of the biggest considerations, and bringing in new talent wouldn't solve that issue. In fact, it would make it worse because we pay everyone who comes and does stuff here. So it wasn't going to be the solution that I wish it could be. If that was possible, I would do it. But that
it might be possible in the future.
And I hope we can. Yeah.
You won't believe the mess happening with the Try Guys right now. Keith and Zach had to step out and face the heat because their last podcast episode had people fired up. Fans were confused, annoyed, and straight up disappointed, so the guys finally had to break their silence and explain what really went down. Just recently, I talked about how the Try Guys announced they were shutting down their longtime podcast, The Tripod, and the reaction was not soft at all. People were upset because real workers were losing their jobs, especially Rainey, who had been putting in work on that show for years. Fans adore her, so hearing she was suddenly out and right before the holidays hit people hard. She didn't even have a clear plan for what came next, and that made supporters even more emotional. The backlash came in hot, and clearly Zach and Keith felt that pressure because they rushed out a follow-up video trying to break everything down. They titled it, "Why We Ended Our Podcast and Answering Your Questions," so you already knew they were about to spill something big. Right from the jump, they admitted they messed up. No dancing around it. They apologized not just for shutting the podcast down, but for how sloppy the communication was. They admitted it loud that 2 people lost their jobs and that they failed to keep up with the transparency their fans expect. That alone had the whole fandom watching with eyebrows raised. Then they got honest about how much the tripod meant to them and to the supporters who tuned in every week. But they said they had to talk numbers because people deserved real answers. And that's when the shocker dropped. According to them, the tripod hasn't made a single dollar in more than a year. Not one. For a show that's been running forever with a loyal fan base, that sounded wild. They explained that their ad sales partner went bankrupt out of nowhere, and replacing that partner took months, almost a full year of waiting. When they finally found another company, that company got absorbed by someone else, and things only got more complicated. They had a minimum guarantee deal, but never brought in enough to hit it. And on top of that, they were contractually required to accept most ads, even the ones they didn't really vibe with. That had them stuck in a corner they couldn't escape. They said straight up that the whole podcast department was being supported by the rest of the company just to keep it breathing. Basically, other parts of their business were paying the bill for a show that wasn't bringing money back in. And they wanted people to know loud and clear that it wasn't anybody's fault. Not Rainey's, not Jonathan's, nobody's. They said the industry itself has changed in a huge way, and it's tougher now than it used to be. They said they tried everything they could to keep the department alive. New strategies, new ideas, new angles, but nothing was enough to save it. And after a certain point, they had to accept reality. They couldn't keep pouring money into something that wasn't holding itself up anymore.
Who have been let go for whatever reason. We always give severance. We try to do our best as employers and try to treat people with the best opportunity in a bad situation. Can't go into details there, but that's it. And we also, there were some questions of like, well, why can't we transfer people to other positions or maybe bring Rainey in as cast? And those are considerations we definitely make. In fact, Jonathan actually transitioned into this department when Miles left. So there are times where we can shuffle things around. And then there are times where we just don't have the exact matchup of job opportunities in-house that could make that sense. And then just going back to Rainey and Jonathan, like you said, we tried to give them as good of a roadmap as we could.
But they made it clear that they want her back and, they are leaving the door open.
At will. So we don't have contracts with anybody. They work with us because they like working with us. And we hope that Rainey likes working with us and wants to come back. And we, again, we've had those talks. It didn't feel fair to make her promise because I can't promise, right? Like someone as talented as her might find another full-time job, that would prevent her from being in videos. Yeah. So when we told her about the situation, she opted to see the show.
The moment they hit that realization, shutting it down became the only move left. People were heated when they found out Rainey wasn't going to be working with the Try Guys anymore, and Jonathan was getting laid off too. Fans felt blindsided because the first announcement didn't really explain anything, and the original Tripod episode just made everything even more confusing. They were talking about working on this new project, this new video series, saying, "You're gonna be getting more," but the audience wasn't buying it at all. Supporters were basically like, "We don't want that new thing. We want this thing." They wanted the Tripod, the show they've stuck with for years. And since the explanation felt so thin, people were left wondering why these specific workers had to lose their jobs in the first place. It felt like pieces of the puzzle were missing, and fans weren't wrong for feeling that way. This time, though, Keith and Zach went deeper and finally got real about the money situation. They said the whole thing came down to the finances, and they didn't want to see Rainey or Jonathan lose their jobs either. They said they feel guilty, they feel bad, and they tried to give them enough time to figure out their next moves so they weren't left stranded. They were trying to show the human side of it, even though the outcome still hurt everyone involved. But they also explained something a lot of fans didn't know. Everyone they work with is technically freelance. They aren't on long-term contracts, so they can't promise that Rainey will show up in future videos because she might land a full-time job somewhere else where she can't hop into Try Guys content anymore. They said the door is open for her, they want her back, but there just wasn't another spot inside the company where she could slide in right now. Then they had to respond to the comments from their last video because people were calling them out hard. Some fans were asking why the show couldn't keep going without Keith and Zach, since the first announcement kind of made it sound like they were just too busy to keep doing the podcast. People were like, "Okay, then step aside. We don't need you, Keith. We don't need you, Zach. Someone else from the Try Guys universe can host it." Fans were literally handing them solutions, but now that all the financial details are out, it's clear none of that would have fixed the situation. They finally admitted it. The podcast wasn't ending because of scheduling. It was ending because it wasn't making money. Bringing in different hosts wouldn't change the fact that the numbers weren't working anymore. It wasn't about ego or control. It was about survival for the company. And when it came to why they couldn't place Rainey and Jonathan somewhere else in the company, they explained that the Try Guys business is actually small behind the scenes. There just wasn't an open lane or another department for them to move into. They said they truly wish it could have worked out differently, but every option they tried to explore led right back to the same wall. They also had to clear the air about something else. In their first video, when they mentioned having 3 new hires, they admitted that it sounded rough and out of place. They said straight up that the timing was terrible, and they wanted to explain why they even brought that up in the first place. Zach then addressed the huge backlash he got for that comment he made about ending the podcast so he could have more time with his daughter. He said he honestly thought people would be understanding if that was the reason he gave, especially since he didn't want to expose all the financial problems just yet. He figured that if he took the blame and said, "I just want to spend more time with my daughter," people would react with understanding, like, "Oh, a father wants to spend more time with his daughter? That makes sense." But that's not how fans reacted at all. Instead, the audience pushed back hard. Folks were saying, "Keith and Miles have kids too, so what makes your situation different?" And they felt like he was throwing that excuse out there to avoid telling the real truth. So Zach explained that he only said it because he felt guilty and was trying to shoulder the blame instead of dragging everyone into the financial mess behind the scenes. He wasn't trying to dodge responsibility, right? He was trying to carry it. Keith also chimed in and said it shouldn't be a bad thing if any of them did want a little more time with their families, but that this was not the reason anyone lost their job. He made that part loud and clear. The layoffs had nothing to do with parenting or busy schedules. The real issue was the business side falling apart, nothing more. So that's what they finally laid out, the real story behind why the podcast had to end. They admitted that their first announcement just wasn't it. It wasn't fully honest, it wasn't complete, and it didn't give fans the whole picture of what was going down or how long Rainey and Jonathan had known they weren't going to be working with the Try Guys anymore. They finally spelled out the timeline and cleared up months of confusion. And now that this new video is out, the comment section has actually turned way more supportive. People still wish they had kept it real in the first video, but they understand the situation now. Fans can see that the guys genuinely tried to keep the podcast department alive and held on as long as they could. They were scrambling behind the scenes trying to save something that just wasn't financially sustainable anymore. Supporters are hoping that maybe down the line something could shift and the podcast could return in a new form, but for now, this is where things stand. This is everything the Try Guys had to say about the backlash, the confusion, and the tough decisions that came after that big announcement that the podcast was ending. Let me know what you think about all of this. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to HeatSpill. I appreciate you all so much, and I'll catch you in the next one.